How many of you were here when the barn was being built? Could you stand so that I could just see? Oh, man, what a big deal. What a big deal. I was going to say if you can stand, but I didn't. Look at you all, you're doing great. 30 years ago is a long time ago and not a long time ago, right? It's complicated how time works. But today what I wanted to do is take a moment to introduce you to two of the folks that have been a part of the church's story and history in working with the barn. But before I do that, I'm going to show a picture on the screen here. Go ahead, Bob. There we go. This is Bill Porterfield and Jan Porterfield. And Bill was the lead carpenter. That's the title, right? He was the lead carpenter on the project when we built this barn 30 years ago. That's a picture of one of the first services that we had here before the roof was even on it. If you go to the next picture, you get a little bit more focus on the people. Your son is in that picture, right? Is that right? Correct. You got to use that microphone if you're going to talk, though. There you go.
Yes.
So where's he standing?
He's in the pulpit, the little guy that's closest to the front of the screen.
And then, can you go to the next picture there, Bob? Tell me if you recognize this guy. Who's that?
You recognize the yellow hard hat.
Yeah, that's you.
That's me.
That's you. And so, one of the reasons why I asked him to come up here, and I'm going to ask him a bunch of questions today, is to help me tell the story, or part of the story, of how we got here. You know, one of the things that's unique about a church is when we show up on Sunday, you know, obviously there's a lot to do, and we're busy every week, but we're all here because people came before us that build buildings before I was ever here. In fact, before you were here, they built buildings, although you got to go back a little bit farther. Jan, can you tell me the story? Because you've been here since 40 years almost exactly, right? Tell me about some of the changes you've seen going from like one service to two to chapel to, you know what I mean? Describe that process of change over those 40 years and what that looked like.
Well, strangely enough, it all seemed to flow together. And I don't have individual memories. I just have kind of a connected memory. Our first memory of Liberty was driving past. We were not members, and there was a wedding out on the lawn, and we looked at this gathering out on the lawn and said, I wonder what kind of people go to a church like that. So we came the next Sunday.
You don't want to know.
Well, there was a little, but we said, well, we got to try this and see what they're like. So we came, and it was unique to us from any other church that we'd been involved in. And the people were not only friendly, there was just something that drew us here, and we immediately felt like, well, I think we're home. And all of the changes over the years, when we joined, obviously we were in the old church, there was not a lot of room, but there were not nearly as many people either. And as the church started filling up, we then went to having 2 services, and our Sunday school started to bulge over, and what are we going to do? And that, was when most of the discussion started about, well, we need something, and David Redding had this vision of building a barn. But really, the barn was not built because we wanted to build a barn or a beautiful building or maybe have tour groups, stop and admire what we did or anything like that. It really was done because more people were coming, just like we had shown up one day. And the heart of the church was we have to have room. If somebody shows up, we have to have room for them to come in and to feel welcome. And as I look around and look at all of you, I think, I know a lot of you, and you were here before we were, but I look at a lot of you and I think, you wouldn't be here maybe if we hadn't, I didn't have the vision, believe me, the leaders of the church had the vision to say, 30, 40, 50, however many years from now, we have to make room for the people who want to know God and people that maybe God just wants us to love.
So if you go back to a picture, Bob, of the main church when they were building it, before there was a roof on it, one of the things that you'll note is that this wasn't the front. And so the pulpit, Scott Martin, can you wave your hand? So Scott right there, that's where the actual pulpit was. Bill, why did we move it? Why are we sitting up here instead of over there? What happened?
The original design was the pulpit was where you just indicated, and the congregation was in more of a circle around it. The architects were pushing a theater in the round concept, more face time for more people. And you'll notice that's why there's balconies through here and there's nothing over here, because that would be too close. Well, we ended up having maybe 3 services after the barn was enclosed, and Pastor Redding decided he wanted it moved up here. My story I got on it, since I'm the guy who had to do all the moving, was that he wanted a longer aisle for brides. He didn't like that short aisle there. He wanted this. So that's where we are, and I think
I've heard it's sometimes too bright with these windows, but the bride, that's the story we're running with.
the sun was always there.
What
God gave us the sun. He didn't give us the long aisle.
There you go. Well, you know, one of the things that I've learned is that almost every single piece of wood here, he helped cut and touched before it became a part of this building. When you think back on those days, what were some of your favorite things that you remember from the actual construction of this place?
Single biggest memory that I have of construction is the picture you see on the screen right now was a Thanksgiving service, and sitting on bales of hay in an unfinished building. So that was November. We got to the point where we could put the roof on in the end of January and February. So if you look up, you'll see slats, wood slats, which you'll find in any old barn, and they were spaced that way. There was air space between them. They're spaced that way because all barns had wood shingles nailed on them. And by spacing them, you had air flowing underneath and over top. So this concept was to maintain the barn look. Well, when we put them on, we spaced them. We had at least 2 weeks of, every time we got on the roof, we had to shovel snow off those boards before we could continue on. And everything was OSHA approved. I mean, I had lines everybody was
Sure.
on. There was aircraft cable stretched this whole peak. And you hung off lanyards off of that, and you had your harnesses on. So nobody was allowed on the roof without that. But it turned out to be a godsend, spaced that way, because we still had room to stick our toes in. We weren't standing on the boards. You could stick your toes in those cracks. So that's why it's...
So the spacing in the cracks was designed so your boots could fit in between to keep you in
Oh,
place.
yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah, I measured my shoes. But that's what it was. That way we didn't have to wait for the ice to melt off or anything else. We could still work.
So, Jan, one of the things that I learned from you this week was that throughout this process of change, like there was a lot that went on here just in 40 years. I mean, just process for a little bit. When you all got here, the church was still small, meeting like at one service in a little chapel over there. And then that chapel actually had to get reconstructed and reoriented to double in size to have more room. Then it got added on with an addition. In fact, in my office right now, there's like a bucket full of plans that we found where they had to build like a whole second level, and that's where some of our administrative offices now are over there. So you went from like one service to two services to another construction project, then to this project. And then, of course, when the Harts were here, they did another project where they built the carriage house over there. So this church has been through, over your 40 years, a lot of change. When you think back on all those seasons, how did we manage change? Was that hard? Was that easy? From your perspective, how do we process change in a church, especially one that's been through so much like ours?
Well, I wasn't working on it, so it wasn't real hard for me. It was a lot harder for Bill, you know. But I don't think that it really seemed hard at the time, because I think there really was a spirit of liberty that just said, this is ours, but it isn't only ours, it's really God's. So we're going to kind of be obedient. And I think that I was not one of the leaders. My role was just to make sure he was healthy and well fed and he could show up. So, you know, I accomplished that. But the people who were in leadership, and I don't mean, oh, we were all perfect and we just every minute agreed that everything was perfect, but we had a vision, and I think that we talked about it and we shared. I think we do what I still see happening. When we have a problem, when we have a situation, when we have a question, it's a church where you can go and talk to somebody and say, I don't understand what's going on here, what's happening. And we just kind of worked through it. I think there were people, there will always be people. There are times I look out and see the old church, and I think, oh, it'd be just sweet to be in there this morning or something, because you started there, you have a connection. But really, I certainly wasn't any part of any kind of a problem. And for Bill, I think that everybody who was working on it, there really wasn't time to be worried about minor details. You had a big project, and we all realized this is going to be different. Well, it is, but I look out here. I haven't sat up here and seen the whole congregation like this for a long time, but I look out and think there are a lot of you who, of course, weren't here when this was even being discussed, when it was being built. And I think, what a beautiful thing. This came to fruition because the spirit of liberty was we're obedient to what we believe God is leading us to do. And I think that a lot of people are here today, or they will be here, or maybe some have come and they've moved on. But there have been a lot of seats filled, which was truly the prayer. God, if we build it, send us somebody to love.
So when this barn was done, you weren't done, right? They sent you back into the chapel, right?
I did over the course of 2 winters, remodel the chapel, yes.
And so what was the vision on the remodeling of the chapel when you got involved with that project?
Mainly, I think it was, they wanted to make it a facility that would be used and not just abandoned. So in remodeling the chapel, I guess you have to imagine that when you walk in the doors where you enter the church now, that's where the seating started. It was a T shape. The chapel that's along the river, the Old Tangi River Road, and then the body where Chris's office is now, that was the seating and faced the pulpit on the east end of the building into a small T shape. So what we did was close the wall off to where it originally was, where the wall now on the west side of that building, that's just a blank wall, would have mirrored exactly the wall that's on the east side. 5 windows, same open construction with the beams. The bell tower was added late 1800s, early 1900s. And so that's when some other major changes were made. There was what you see, the wainscoting on the inside, the white wood that's trimmed. Okay, that was done with the bell tower. When I remodeled and took the wood off of the entire east wall was covered with rough sawn soft maple. When I took that off, that wall had the wainscoting still on it. It had just been covered up. So I was able to take that off, and I had enough wainscoting to do the bell tower. So the wood that's wainscoting in the bell tower is original to when it was done. And then I milled enough more to do the inside of the chapel.
When you were doing these projects, what was it like working with the Amish who were involved in this project?
Okay, now the Amish were only involved in this. Actually, it's a misconception that there was any different. They aren't different.
Just the beards.
They have a different lifestyle, but they aren't any different than any other construction worker I've ever worked with, except for the fact that when they have a problem or they're upset about something, they talk in German. That way, number one, you don't know what the problem is, but you also don't know whether they're ticked off at you or something they ran into.
Das ist nicht gut.
Yeah, you what? But no, they have the same belief in the same God that we believe in. They have a different cultural mindset. And I'll throw this out just because they spend a lot of time at our house too, is that one of the reasons that they shun technology is that it keeps their people employed. They don't use all of the fancy farm equipment because they need more hand labor on the farms. So there's jobs for people, and that's probably the main reason that they maintain their lifestyle. Now there's different sects of Amish. I think the Schwarzeneggers are the most extreme, and they're not even allowed to have stone on the driveways. But every group is different. But there's reasons why they do this, and it's not that they necessarily hate something, it's just not to their benefit. On this job, they were allowed to use electric tools, but they couldn't own them. There'll be pictures if you...
I'm the opposite. I'm allowed to own them, but you don't want me to use them.
Yeah, well, there's some things I don't use either. But no, it's not like it's working with anybody else.
So Jan, as we kind of close our time, like what advice would you give to a congregation for those of us that weren't here when, so maybe both of you can even share if you want, but I wasn't here when this was being built. You know, so I show up in 2023 roughly, and I'm the beneficiary of all of this. I didn't build it. I didn't have anything to do with it. At minimum, my job is to not burn it down. That's kind of my job, right? What do you think is important for those of us to know who are new, that weren't a part of that time, that was important to this church during that season?
Well, something that I've thought about, excuse me, and probably with a little bit of pride. I think everybody who is involved in this in some way has a little bit of pride. But when we talk now about change, what time are we going to have the services? Are we going to do this? Are we going to do that? When we were going through this, we were going from that little church to this. And I thought to myself, I don't know how much bigger a change you could go through than what we did went through it willingly and happily, but we knew it was important and we really felt it was God's will. So I don't think that the change was nearly as scary, but it did make me, excuse me, stop and think of the history of Liberty and all of the changes that have gotten us here. You know, from being people who stood out in the rain and started to worship. Worship was that important, sharing God was that important, and everything just kind of worked out, and I think that's my takeaway. You know, they did a whole lot more changing even than we did. We walked across the parking lot, which wasn't a parking lot then, but they changed. And I don't know what their vision was, but wouldn't it be interesting if we could have some of those people come back and tell us, well, when we started and we started planning all of this, what they thought this would look like 200 years later. That would be an exciting conversation in heaven. Maybe David Redding will be organizing that for us.
The one thing I would add to that is that if you think of Liberty Presbyterian Church, it was founded in 1810. The chapel was built in 1820. The interior wasn't done until between 1830 and 1840. So for the first, at least minimum of 10 years, it was just a timber frame structure with no finished walls, just the outside wall, nothing. And it wasn't until in the mid-1800s that the interior walls were finished and some heat was put in the building. But they went from that to adding the first floor addition that's over there attached, to adding the second floor addition, to then running out of room. We built this building over the course of 2.5 years, this and what we referred to as the connector where the restrooms are, and the carriage house was supposed to be all one project. But ran out of money in December of '95 with just this and the connector done. And so we had to stop. And then the carriage house was done, when did you say, 2009?
When the Hearts were here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's when it was finished. But for those of you, I don't know, that would remember the original plans for the carriage house, it was a large room in front with a big stone fireplace, a minister's office, one other office downstairs, and 2 loft areas that could be used for meetings. Which, in my personal opinion, since this is God's project to begin with, he said, well, that's it. That isn't going to work.
But the pastor's office is the most important. You should start with that.
That's why he said, we are going to take a deep breath here. And we ended up having a room that could fully house Sunday school, lots of space, where we wouldn't have had. We would have been zilch out of luck for Sunday school 2 years after we moved into this building. And I can look at it now and say, you know, that God's been in this whole process. He's been with Liberty from the beginning it was started. He will be with it throughout, going forward. And as long as we keep that in mind and don't let our own personal egos or opinions or anything get in the road, then God won't have to step in and say, okay, guys, I'm cutting your funding because you ain't going the right way. And when we did, we got it back and we're on track. And more change is coming. I can see that. I know that. We've got a beautiful space, but we're going to keep growing. And we can only keep growing if we let God do His will his place because he's the one in charge. We're not in charge. So, guess that's it.
We say thank you to the Porterfields. Let's pray. Will you bow your heads and pray with me? God, we give you thanks for all the folks that have been a part of this church going all the way back centuries. For the people that laid the first stone, the folks who had the original vision, the folks who gathered in unheated frames, not even buildings, to worship you with the hope that one day more people would come to know your love and your grace and your forgiveness and your joy. We sit here on a stage that I can say I never built, but I'm sitting next to a man whose hands are all over this building, and we say thank you to him and to those that have been a part of creating spaces for us to worship you. We pray all of this in Jesus' powerful name, and all God's people said, amen. One more thank you to you guys.